durante los años de la República Democrática Alemana es tan solo una parte de la historia de esta empresa y su declive a partir de 1889 con la caída del muro de Berlín y la subsecuente reunificación de Alemania es otra. Ambas constituyen un asombroso y a su vez lúgubre capítulo de la historia industrial del siglo XX, escrito a través de la vida y el trabajo de las empleadas de esta empresa que conformaron la mayor fuerza de trabajo femenil en la Alemania del Este. A través de esta ponencia, desde los entramados de la historia social del trabajo con perspectiva de género, los aspectos positivos que tuvo la promoción laboral femenil dentro de la RDA, pero también las desventajas de las condiciones de trabajo extremas a las que muchas de las empleadas de Orbo estuvieron sometidas, sin dejar de lado el impacto que significó para ellas la disolución de la RDA y la reunificación de Alemania. Antecedentes históricos. La BEB Filmfabrik Wolfen, más tarde denominada Orbo, fue la planta matriz de la BEB Photochemisches Kombinat con filiales en Berlín, Dresde, Wernigerode, Dessau, Schmoll y Calbe. La mayoría de estas poblaciones, incluida Wolfen, se localizan en los actuales estados federados de Sajonia y Sajonia-Anhalt en el este de Alemania. La historia de la empresa comienza en el año de 1850 con el establecimiento en Berlín de una fábrica para el procesamiento de amoníaco y otros productos como mordentes y colorantes y la extracción de tintes de anilina. Más tarde, en 1873, esta empresa se fusionó con otra empresa afín para dar como resultado al consorcio Aktiengesellschaft für Anilin-Fabrikation, que posteriormente sería AGFA. En 1909, tras el incremento en la producción de productos fotográficos y debido a las exigencias en cuanto a la calidad de aire para la fabricación de estos, se decidió extender la planta al pequeño pueblo de Wolfen, iniciando su operación en 1910. Tras la Primera Guerra Mundial, la demanda de película disminuye significativamente, por lo que se plantea la creación de una nueva línea de productos. En 1917, tomando como principio las investigaciones de Lobhofer, se iniciaron las pruebas para la producción de seda artificial mediante el procedimiento de viscosa a base de celulosa de madera, dando paso a la fundación de una nueva planta experimental que más tarde se convertiría en la Filmfabrik Wolfen. A raíz de la fusión de AGFA con otras empresas como Bayer, se forma otro consorcio y entonces la planta de Wolfen se convertiría oficialmente en 1930 en la sede de la División 3 para la producción de materiales fotográficos, plásticos y fibras. Más tarde, en 1934, se fabricaría a partir del PVC postclorado desarrollado en Bitterfeld la primera fibra artificial sintética del mundo, llamada fibra o seda PC. Durante este mismo periodo y con el descubrimiento del efecto de las sales de oro por el químico Robert Kozlowski, que aumenta la velocidad de la película, se dio una nueva serie de investigaciones que darían como resultado el desarrollo de diferentes productos fotográficos en color, culminando en 1936 con la presentación por parte de John Egger de la película Agfa Color Neu, desarrollada en colaboración con Gustav Wilmans y Wilhelm Schneider. Esta fue la primera película de color moderna con copulantes de color incluidos, es decir, con 3 capas de gelatina superpuestas sensibles a la luz azul, verde y roja. Durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial, fueron principalmente las mujeres y las prisioneras del campo de concentración femenino de Ravensbrück quienes mantuvieron la operación de la fábrica. Hacia el final de la guerra, aproximadamente un 14% de la superficie construida de la fábrica fue destruida, lo que paralizó temporalmente la producción. De abril a junio de 1945, la fábrica estuvo ocupada por tropas estadounidenses. Y en julio de 1945 las tropas soviéticas ocuparon Wolfen, la producción se reanudaría en 1946, sin embargo, un 60% de los equipos de la fábrica fueron desmontados y trasladados a la Unión Soviética en concepto de reparación de daños. Más tarde, la empresa se incorporó a la Sowjetische Aktiengesellschaft o Sociedad Anónima Soviética Fotoplenka, en la que se encontraba agrupada toda la industria cinematográfica de materias primas de la Unión Soviética. En enero de 1954, la fábrica de películas pasó a manos del gobierno de la RDA, convirtiéndose en una empresa estatal con el nombre BEB Film Chemie Faser Agfa Wolfen. La Filmfabrik Wolfen continuó vendiendo sus productos con el logotipo de AGFA. Sin embargo, las patentes importantes se habían enviado al oeste a AGFA Leverkusen. Por lo tanto, en 1956 fue necesario firmar un contrato, un acuerdo de uso conjunto entre las dos empresas sobre esta marca y donde se estableció que Wolfen podría utilizar la marca dentro del Consejo de Ayuda Mutua Económica y en países amigos como la India, mientras que Leverkusen ACFA podría utilizarla en el resto del mundo con la excepción de Francia y Yugoslavia. A partir de 1964, debido a que este acuerdo no se prorrogó, fue necesario adoptar otro nombre y es en este momento que se adopta la marca oficialmente de Orbo, original Wolfen, para la comercialización de productos y en 1970 se convirtió oficialmente en la planta matriz BEV Fotochemisches Kombinat. En 1989, antes de la caída del muro de Berlín, o paralelo a la caída del muro de Berlín, era el momento de máximo esplendor de la planta de Wolfen, con una superficie de 165 hectáreas y contaba con un total de 14.500 empleados. Se producían 40 millones de metros cuadrados de materia base, de los que el 50% se transformaba en película virgen. Había 2.500 unidades de montaje que producían un total de 200 tipos de película diferentes. Y en esta sede se produjeron principalmente películas cinematográficas, películas fotográficas, películas para televisión, películas técnicas, películas para rayos X, y por esta razón la fábrica se denominaba coloquialmente como la película. Ahora les voy a hablar del proceso de la posguerra y del papel de las mujeres en la reconstrucción de Alemania y de la fábrica. Al final de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, ya trabajaban en las zonas de ocupación soviética aproximadamente 2.5 millones de mujeres, lo que representaba aproximadamente un 38% de todas las mujeres en edad laboral. Los años anteriores, las mujeres ya habían desempeñado en todas las áreas en las que había necesidad de hombres. Las exigencias familiares, la necesidad económica y la propaganda del Estado propiciaron el proceso en el que un gran número de mujeres se vieron obligadas a ser autosuficientes y convertirse en el sustento para su familia. La falta de hombres causada por la guerra dio como resultado lo que algunos denominaron un excedente de mujeres, al igual que el creciente éxodo fuera del país que provocó una escasez en la fuerza laboral, creando así la necesidad de aprovechar la reserva de mujeres. En noviembre de 1945 se publicó el mandato Smatbefehl número 153, que señalaba que todas las personas capacitadas para trabajar en las zonas de ocupación soviética debían registrarse para su puesta en función. Esto incluía mujeres de 15 a 50 años, al igual que hombres de 14 a 65. Las mujeres ya no ocupaban solo puestos como vendedoras, asistentes de oficina, secretarias o en el campo de la salud. En el 25 año de la República Democrática Alemana, es normal que muchas mujeres ocupen puestos directivos, sean respetadas como trabajadoras laboriosas y diligentes capataces o directivas calificadas. En la actualidad, 151 de nuestras mujeres tienen un título universitario, 275 un título de escuela técnica superior, 107 son maestras artesanas y 2.792 son trabajadoras especializadas. 239 de nuestras compañeras trabajan en puestos directivos como jefas de las divisiones principales o gerentes, jefas de planta, jefas de departamento, jefas de sección, jefas de grupo, jefas de turno o capataces. A finales de los años 80, la BEV Fotochemisches Kombinat contaba ya con aproximadamente 21.000 empleados, 15.500 de los cuales trabajaban en la fábrica de películas Wolfen, entre ellas 8.500 mujeres, por lo que se considera como la mayor empresa femenina dentro de la RDA. Debido al creciente número de trabajadoras requeridos, se solicitó el reforzamiento de las líneas de producción con mujeres provenientes de países amigos y del bloque socialista como Cuba, Vietnam, Mozambique, Polonia, entre otros. Estas mujeres también se integraron a los programas de promoción y capacitación que desarrolló la empresa en concordancia con las disposiciones legales establecidas por el régimen socialista de la RDA. Durante la consulta realizada en el archivo de la Industrie und Filmmuseum Wolfen, fue posible encontrar múltiples documentos como los que ven aquí, como contratos colectivos de trabajo, planes de promoción y apoyo para las mujeres empleadas de la fábrica, folletos sobre prestaciones laborales y publicaciones conmemorativas del establecimiento de la RDA. En estos documentos se identifica claramente la influencia ideológica socialista de Marx y en particular de Engels y Bebel, y de los textos de carácter más práctico de Lenin y Clara Zetkin. En el Frauenförderungsplan, Plan para Promoción de la Mujer de 1959 de la Fábrica de Películas, abre con una cita de Zetkin que se lee, abro cita: «La mujer no es una mala copia del hombre, tiene sus propias cualidades especiales como ser humano, con sus capacidades especiales que se le han impedido desarrollar durante mucho tiempo, hará cosas indispensables en la lucha y la organización. La conclusión del Plan para el Desarrollo de la Mujer y las obligaciones contienen y establecen el objetivo de que en el futuro la mayoría de las empresas femeninas sean gestionadas por las propias mujeres». Para esto se proponía la toma de acción en dos rubros principales: capacitación y promoción de la mujer en los ámbitos social y profesional, y asistencia social y cultural, y medidas para aliviar la carga de las mujeres trabajadoras. De acuerdo con el contrato colectivo de trabajo de la fábrica de Wolfen de 1954, algunos de estos apoyos y prestaciones incluían guarderías a domicilio, sala de lactancia, habitaciones para alojar a los hijos mayores de 12 años, reconocimientos médicos para las mujeres empleadas en los cuartos oscuros, examen radiológico a todos los empleados, casa de cultura, proyección de películas, vacaciones en la empresa en el apartamento del Mar Báltico, entre otros. En la publicación de 1970, El rostro de la mujer socialista, se menciona la importancia de la fábrica de películas dentro del sistema de promoción y desarrollo para las mujeres trabajadoras de la RDA. Abro cita: «La fábrica cinematográfica desempeña un papel decisivo en la aplicación de la revolución científico-técnica en el marco de nuestra economía nacional. Es una de las empresas determinantes de la estructura de nuestra república. De gran importancia es la realización del amplio programa de fotocine, así como el aumento decisivo de la producción de películas y el desarrollo de nuevos métodos de grabación». Cierro cita. Si bien existía un gran número de prestaciones laborales para las empleadas de la empresa, las condiciones de trabajo, salvo para las que trabajaban en la administración o en el área de investigación, no eran del todo óptimas. A pesar de esto, debido a los sueldos mejor remunerados en los trabajos técnicos y manuales, muchas mujeres preferían integrarse a estos, en lugar de ocupar puestos administrativos en las oficinas de la empresa. Al inicio, el trabajo se distribuía en un sistema de 2 turnos. La producción corría día y noche, implementándose un sistema de 3 turnos, en el que se trabajaba incluso los domingos. La mayoría de las empleadas cubrían entre 8 y 12 horas de trabajo diario. Debían cambiar de turno regularmente. Sin embargo, hubo algunos, como el de ser canceladas o prisioneras que se integraron al trabajo de la fábrica, en los que cubrían turnos de mayor duración. La temperatura de las áreas de trabajo también era extrema, dependiendo de los diferentes procesos de la producción. En el taller de fundición y en los colgadores para secado se podían alcanzar hasta 30 grados centígrados, mientras que en las áreas de emulsionado la temperatura era tan solo de 4 grados. Los largos turnos de trabajo en los que debían estar sentadas y mantener la concentración necesaria para realizar las tareas asignadas eran especialmente pesados para el cuerpo de las empleadas. La doctora Ingrid Edner, que trabajó en Orgo como médica laboral, recuerda, abro cita: «El trabajo era monótono y realmente difícil en todas las áreas. Yo no podía entenderlo, pero las mujeres no querían irse. Les gustaba mucho trabajar. La mayoría de los problemas estaban en la zona de los hombros y los brazos. Radiológicamente no había cambios tan graves, pero la musculatura estaba muy tensa. Como médicos a veces éramos las únicas personas de contacto para las mujeres. Vivían lejos, a menudo llegaban en la oscuridad, trabajaban 8 horas y se iban a casa. Pero cuando normalmente ya habían vuelto a oscurecer, a menudo escribía una incapacidad, no por una enfermedad grave, sino porque estaban al límite de sus fuerzas y no había una forma de ayudarlas». Durante el proceso de reunificación de Alemania, una gran cantidad de mujeres no pudo reintegrarse a la vida laboral, ya que su trabajo especializado no era requerido en las fábricas o porque no tenían acceso a cubrir los puestos en las empresas que los hombres ya habían ocupado. Para mayo de 1990, algunas de las trabajadoras de Orbo siguieron ocupando sus puestos en las líneas de producción. De inicio se les dijo que sus máquinas eran anticuadas y que tendrían que retirarlas. Un mes más tarde se les dijo que las ventas ya no eran tan buenas y que sería necesario hacer recortes en las jornadas de trabajo, primero a 3 días y posteriormente a 2 días por semana. Una de estas trabajadoras que permaneció en Orbo durante el inicio de la década de 1990 fue Eda Koch, que trabajaba en el taller de fundición para emulsiones. Ella recuerda con gran pena que su preparación y experiencia no fue valorada al punto en el que ella y varias de sus colegas se vieron obligadas a decidirse por una jubilación anticipada o por trabajar en la Sociedad para la Organización de la Eliminación de Residuos Peligrosos, que se ocuparía más tarde del desmantelamiento de la planta industrial de Orbo. La señora Koch narra esta complicada etapa de la siguiente manera, abro cita: «Era bastante duro, cuando sabíamos que éramos nosotras las que íbamos a deshacernos de nuestros propios puestos de trabajo. No era una buena sensación. Hoy nos llaman auxiliares. Lo que eso significa cuando vamos a algún lugar es una gran humillación que te desvaloricen así». Conclusiones. En la RDA, si bien se fomentó entre las mujeres, incluso más tempranamente que para su contraparte del oeste, un espíritu de soberanía y competencia, también se continuaron desempeñando los roles convencionales de cuidado de los hijos, las tareas domésticas. Existía la presión tanto por engendrar una nueva generación responsable del futuro de Alemania como por la reconstrucción de daños ocasionados por la guerra y la lucha por el establecimiento del socialismo. Las mujeres tenían no solo el derecho, sino como regla la responsabilidad de mantener un trabajo. En el caso de la fábrica de películas Wolfen, a pesar de haber destacado como una empresa modelo para la promoción y el desarrollo de trabajo de las mujeres en el régimen socialista de la RDA, no se diferencia demasiado con la situación vivida de forma generalizada por las mujeres trabajadoras en el resto de Alemania del Este. Este fue el dilema al que se enfrentaron las mujeres trabajadoras en el tiempo de la RDA y por tanto de las empleadas de Orbo. Acostumbradas a la retórica emancipatoria y a las leyes fundamentales del Estado, les resultaba difícil enunciar los límites de la igualdad que les regalaba el Estado Padre, especialmente porque esto podría ser visto como una opinión en contra del régimen. Si bien no existe un consenso sobre las causas últimas de la disolución de la RDA, y algunos señalan que el proyecto socialista estaba destinado al fracaso desde el inicio, a través de esta investigación ha quedado en evidencia que en la RDA los derechos, igualdad y emancipación de la mujer eran entendidos quizás desafortunadamente como una cuestión de clase y no como una cuestión de género. La cuestión de la mujer se presentaba superada y resuelta. La política de la mujer se centraba en el proceso de producción, pues se afirmaba que la opresión histórica estaba ligada al desarrollo de la propiedad privada de los medios de producción y su progreso social dependía de su integración en la economía socialista. Si bien hubo avances notorios, no pudo llegarse a una situación de justicia plena y se terminaron reproduciendo las viejas estructuras patriarcales del trabajo, lo cual se demuestra al hacer un comparativo simple de cómo empleaban su tiempo los hombres y las mujeres, cuánto ganaban y qué peldaño ocupaban en la escala social. Más allá de los errores y aciertos cometidos respecto a las políticas de Estado y el sistema de género en la RDA, todas y todos los que trabajaron en Orbo se sentían muy unidos a la empresa. Orbo formaba parte y daba vida al pueblo de Wolfen y sus alrededores. Las mujeres eran especialmente importantes para la producción de la empresa. Sin el trabajo y el esfuerzo de estas mujeres, nada habría funcionado y muy probablemente la fábrica de películas Orbo jamás hubiese existido. Muchas gracias.
Hi, my name is Mika Tomita. I am a curator at the National Film Archive of Japan. I wish I could be there with you. I would like to thank Mariana, Guillermo, and everyone who supported my online presentation. Please note, I will use the Japanese words keppatsu, el kamiyui, instead of hairdresser. Keppatsu laid the foundation for hairdressers, hairstylists, and hair design in Japanese films, and remain indispensable in period films. Keppatsu is a noun which means to tie hair or tied hair. Their root is in the historical profession called kamiui from the Edo period. The word kamiui is still well known thanks to Kamiui Shinza, this lady killer in popular kabuki plays. Because it's an old profession, keppatsus or kamiuis have received little attention as film staff, and there are few documents about them. I will report how keppatsu, the pioneer hairdressers in Japanese cinema, opened up a new career in the film industry. Chapter 1 introduces the National Film Archive of Japan's special screening of Women Who Made Japanese Cinema, Part 1. Chapter 2 shows how the female kamiuis, once the object of scorn, established themselves as independent professionals and self-expression for Japanese women in the era of modernization. Chapter 3 focuses on the activities of keppatsus from the 1910s to the 1920s. I will show how they helped to build the golden age of silent Japanese cinema. My colleague Morimune, in charge of planning and screening, spent almost a year researching women filmmakers whose careers ran from silent films to the 1960s. She compiled a list of about 90 women. Their biographies are available in PDF format on our website. Of the approximately 460 special screenings that we have held at our archive since 1970, about 130 include the names of specific filmmakers, and of those, approximately 13 featured women including Kinuyo Tanaka, Isuzu Yamada, Hideko Takamine, and Kyoko Kagawa, and also Setsuko Hara, Yoshiko Yamaguchi. In addition to these actresses, other pioneering women featured are film distributor Kashiko Kawakita, plus directors Kinuyo Tanaka, Sumiko Haneda, and Naomi Kawase. We provided a comprehensive overview to give a new perspective on the activities of all women filmmakers, not only by strong-willed actresses and directors. Also, we thought that showing the backbone of pioneering women filmmakers in various fields would encourage women working in the film industry. It is fair to say that this project is a movement. As a profession, kamiui began in the Edo period. In 1658, there were 808 kamiui shops in today's Tokyo, which served as friendly meeting places. Kamiui shops at the foot of bridges were not liked because those kamiuis also worked as prison guards. Onna kamiui appeared in the 1760s, and their numbers increased by the 18,000s. Eventually, the military dictatorship banned luxuries for women and shut down the shops in 1841. Onna kamiuis secretly went to customers' homes to tie hair. In the Meiji period, since only women tied hair, kamiui meant only onna kamiui. A simple hairstyle that women could tie themselves called sokuhatsu became popular. Kamiuis adopted facial techniques and Western hairstyles. Famous kamiris had their stores near red light districts to serve geishas. Upper-class clients received home visits. This article is an example of the discriminatory view of kamiris at the time. The owner kamiri is not a noble profession as technician, and their thoughts are vile. With such vile thoughts, one goes to A's house, B's house, C's house, D's house, and they talk about the reputation of A's daughter, rumors about B's wife, bad-mouthing C, looking for something bad about D, etc. The reasons for these bad images can be broadly categorized by the following 5 points. 1. Most were from poor families. 2. Main customers were geishas and prostitutes. 3. The bad image of prison officials. 4. The dirty work of dandruff removal. 5. The threat to the paternalistic society. After 1899, regulations were established in each prefecture requiring barbers to maintain hygiene. In 1913, the first kamiri school was founded to teach essential hygiene and disinfection methods, knowledge, and facial techniques. The kamiri school was called Hair Beauty School. The following year, more schools opened and keppatsu unions were formed around Japan. Kamiri contests were held in major cities, widely reported in the media, and gained popularity among women as a modern and casual fashion. In the late 1910s, women from wealthy families and college graduates became kamiris. A newspaper reported, "It was a long time ago that I scorned onna kamiri. Now there are schools to be keppatsu with lots of income." So I will show one sequence from the film in 1926 called Women's Occupation. Of course, there are telephone operators. Please see their hairstyles. It's easy to tie by themselves. And this is a kamiri shop or hair salon in town. Of course, in 1926. This hairstyle was popular around 1925, especially for upper middle class women. Oh, you can see this film on our YouTube channels. Please Google it. So the kamiri hairdresser also dressed the women in kimonos. Yeah. Pioneer Keppatsu Moto Ina graduated from elementary school and moved to Tokyo alone to train under a kamiri master. In the mid-1910s, she began to work as keppatsu in the film industry. Her career shows that she was a traditional kamiri, But her comment, "We didn't like to be called Kamiyui-san in the studio," shows her awareness of the social disdain for Kamiyui. Though she was in the hair technician's department in Nikatsu, she was called Kamiyui-san. Her senior apprentice, Iku Kikuchi, was in the hair arrangement department in Shochiku, but was also called Kamiyui-san. Kamiyui Ik-san, right? Japan's first film studio probably had keppatsus on staff. At that time, keppatsus were assistants of Tokoyama's. Actresses appeared in Japanese film in 1918 in their own hair, and keppatsus became fully employed. They appeared in the film credits of most main studios in 1930. This is around 1925. Keppatsus read scenarios, of course, then quickly created the hairstyle that immediately suited the shape of each actress's face, personality, and character's social position. They also worked on location, of course, and were still called Kamiyui-san, right? They struggled with tying the top of actress' hair without oil, since oil glistens hair under lights. Also, the worlds depicted in film became varied around 1925 or 1926, and the keppatsus needed to quickly create each hairstyle to reflect the respective eras and characters' social positions. Film actresses became very popular in beauty magazines and women magazines due to keppatsu's contribution. Actresses decorated both the covers and the color pages of the fan magazines of various studios too. Developing the charm of actresses by keppatsus became one of the driving forces in the evolution of Japanese film. I want to pay tribute to the once despised Onna Kamiyui and keppatsus. Despite not being called by their names, but Kamiyui-san, these women played a major role in building the golden age of Japanese silent cinema. Thank you so much for your attention.
Good afternoon. I want to thank FIAF Scientific Committee for accepting this proposition. And I'm really happy to be here to share with you this research on women's labor in French photochemical film labs, even if it's still in its early stages. And this work matters a great deal to me, especially since I became a film lab technician myself. And it's complicated because detailed information about laboratory work organization is sometimes inaccessible. And the information about the workers is even more scarce. The lack of information on film industry technicians has been highlighted in research since 1920s. As one French historian pointed out, I quote, "Since workers living in a Lumiere factory, cinema has remained outside the factory gates," end of quote. With the way for the film lab closures set off by the arrival of digital cinematography, official studies on the film industry workforce no longer even count photochemical workers, operators, and technicians. However, taking a look at the history of film labs and their workers can help us think about the future of film labs and its relationship to women workers. But first, we actually have to find these women. Who and where are they? Images such as photographs or documentary films, and 17 interviews with lab technicians from 6 different film labs. So let's unwind the real film history to see what positions women have held in French photochemical film labs from the beginning of the film history through World War II, and then in the second half of the 20th century, and finally during the decline of analog film. Before laboratories, they were workshops and factories. Women's number were highest in coloring workshops, like the ones for magic lantern lights. However, they also took part in many of the other activities that go into producing photochemical images. For example, in Lumiere factory, women did many different jobs, making emulsions, coating, glass cutting, cleaning, and quality control. They worked during the day, even as they work in the dark. As film production took off, several companies expanded their facilities. France's most remarkable example was the Pathé company. In 1908, the number of factory workers totaled 840. In 1913, that number shot up to 1,891 workers. Of this, 73% were women. They were found in almost every department: coloring, stencil cutting, editing, quality control, printing, shipping, cafeteria, etc. There was a clear-cut gender division of labor. Men worked in film processing, mixing chemicals, mechanics, and research, while women's employment was less physically and often less intellectually demanding. And Pathé published a technical manual in 1926 that pictures women at work. Surprisingly, in Chapter 2, entitled The Basics of Emotions, almost all the technical process are illustrated with the image of women in lab coats in a testing laboratory. They might be assistants or just for their beauty, I don't know, because I found no women in Pathé's engineers list. Or it is possible that images of women were used to highlight the careful and precise manipulation of film in Pathé's factory. At the time, terms such as dexterity, patience, finesse, meticulousness were used to explain feminization of certain jobs. Movie magazine journalists were described women's film factory work, highlighted these qualities, limiting their coverage to coloring, editing, and quality control. Women were always joiners, colorists, or stencil cutters, in spite of the real diversity of women's work in early cinema. Manual dexterity is what enables some joiners to become editors. We now consider editing be both technical and artistic work, but this was not yet the case in the early history of cinema. And this who's who guide of film industry first listed women editors with colorists and stencil cutters, which were probably seen as similar jobs done by the same people. Only 6 people were listed in the material section, not production. All of them were women. When film editing first entered the category of production in the 1930s, editors were placed just after the script girl. Was this invisibilization of the editing linked to the idea that it was women's work? Large industrial laboratory implemented a rather strict division of labor, and workers often did the same job for years before they could change departments. Departments were carefully partitioned with a view to boosting productivity and optimizing yields. Gopistonda is a film about the work done in film labs, shot in 1976 in 5 of the biggest French laboratories. This documentary presents the analog film lab standard workflow. Each step is presented by real technicians. Several scenes were filmed in Eclair laboratories, which then employed approximately 600 people. This slide shows service with women circled in green, with men in yellow. Both women and men were found in processing, and the color timing circled in orange. But for the processing, the female workers is not working on the chemical processing as the man, but she's checking the processed reel with a film viewer. And for the color timing, it's a man color timer who is seen discussing the image rendering with the clients in the film. According to the interview I've conducted so far, the color timer was often considered the start of film lab. Color timing had an artistic element and came with important responsibilities. This job was held primarily by men who worked directly with film crew and clients. Color timers work around the film crew schedule, projecting rushes every night, including weekends. This is a nearly impossible schedule to keep for women with children, since childcare was considered women's work. And that's an opinion that persists in some societies even today. The division of labor in large French labs wasn't very far removed from that of Pathé factory in the early 20th century. And most women worked in a negative and positive cutting, and for a long time, only women worked in this department. They were called gouzettes, which might translate to seamstresses. Occasionally, a few men worked as cutter, but they were an exception. And this ratio ran counter to the processing department, which employed the men exclusively. The explanation I've most often heard is that processing was the most stressful and dangerous job in the lab. Stressful because the workers processed the original camera negatives, which means a huge responsibility, and dangerous because they manipulated the chemical, harmful for to the health of women, and by extension, children. Long hours of this hard physical labor were done in total darkness. On the contrary, in printing, women outnumbered men. People would even say, that job is for chicks. When serial printing services opened in the 1990s to mass-produce release prints, the physical demanding of the job intensified, but the women were still working on the floor. It insists to me that the division of labor was more flexible in small labs. And please, run the clip, please. The first clip, yes. The clip is silent, so I will keep talking. And this was the case for Jean-Paul Boyer's laboratory, founded in 1960. It's one of the first laboratories specialized in restoration of old film, but at the time, which means reprinting, basically. And this footage, shot in 1971, shows two women working on chemicals and film repairs in Jean-Paul Boyer's lab. And now she's working on a Lumiere's film. And after his death, his spouse, Laure Boyer, continued lab's work. And her restoration work was featured in the documentary Les Fous de Cinéma, that would be the second clip to run, and broadcast on the French television in 1980. And this documentary highlights the flexible work organization of a more artisanal approach. A craft person mindset allowed her to tailor restoration work to fit the specific conditions and history of each film. In 1980s and 1990s, small laboratories often worked on film restoration projects for making dupe negatives and new prints from old films. Another case is the Renov Film Laboratory, located in the Greater Paris area. In the 1980s, all employees were women, with the exception of the boss and his son. 3 or 4 women were responsible for the entire chain of production, from film repair, printing, to black and white processing. And each person could work autonomously on the project. Even when this small laboratory was built by Sophie Puech and merged with another company to form Cap Renov, women remained a majority in the photochemical department. The number of workers with versatile technical skills is greater in film restoration, as is the number of women, even if they do not necessarily hold management positions. It seems to me that in a small business, where the quest of efficiency is not equated with breaking down tasks, the gender division of labor is weaker. Women can hold technical responsibilities. Does this mean that when the profit is at stake, there's no place for women? In the 2000s, the expansion of digital production and broadcasting had determinant impacts on the business of photochemical labs. Large film labs production dropped, and even if they captured the film restoration projects, many of them shut down, and the number of photochemical employees decreased dramatically. In France, the shutdown of GTC put 86 people out of work in 2009, and when GTC's photochemical lab equipment was bought in 2010 by another company, only 10 people remained in the photochemical department. Of the two women left, one was a negative cutter, another one was a secretary. The negative cutting department was among the first to disappear from the photochemical production lines, as video and digital tools made editing without manipulating film possible. Did this affect the number of women working as lab technicians? I don't have precise figures for the gender breakdown of film cutters in film labs, but recent CNC reports show a drop in number of women editors in film production. And these statistics account only for the film crew and production team, not the lab technicians. Women represented 50.6% of the workforce in 2009, only 37.1% in 2020. Though editing was long seen as women's work, men now outrank women as editors. I also conducted a search on LinkedIn for people with technical jobs in the film industry or audiovisual production who mentioned the word film, photochemical, or analog on their profile. I found almost 400 people, and only 26% of them were women. The decline in jobs in photochemical film labs didn't help women continue their careers in the sector. Men hold senior technician position at much higher rates than women in France today. Behind apparent gender diversity in certain film labs today, a disparity between women and men in technical jobs and a gender-based division of labor persists. But if we carefully examine the terms used to explain the link between women and specific tasks throughout film history, terms such like dexterity, small hands, gentle touch, women should dominate the professional ranks across the board in photochemical film lab today. Indeed, laboratory work mainly on old films and less on new production films. Is there not a contradiction between what's being said and what's being done? Therefore, the place women hold is perhaps not so much linked to these supposedly feminine qualities, but rather to a widespread male dominance and to a competitive environment built upon gender stereotypes and exacerbated by the industrial system. The future of film labs and the film archives are closely tied. The livelihood of film labs are even more dependent upon orders from archives. For all that, the future of archives also depends on preserving the material and cultural heritage of laboratory. For me, film preservation cannot stop at photograms of imagery and sound. Archives and laboratory share responsibility for conservation and transmission of knowledge, equipment, and technical expertise. Film labs must receive support to transition from segmented assembly-style work to highly skilled labor that is at once technical and cultural. Sensitivity to a gender balance in the world of archives has had a double effect. Teen diversity has bolstered equity and contributed to the expansion of film heritage through the reintegration of so many forgotten work by women and men that were excluded from industrial and commercial system. Diversity is, therefore, key to the film heritage preservation. I believe that fostering diversity and breaking down the gender barriers that divide workers within laboratories are the essential prerequisite to limiting the concentration and capitalization of the sector, and to encouraging the preservation of a film culture. Might we imagine one day including a diversity clause, especially in the technical professions, for the invitation to bid that we send to labs? Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel truly humbled to speak to an audience of experts today. When it comes to the history of color in film, I have to admit that I'm still learning, so I'm hoping to be able to benefit from your profound knowledge on our ongoing research on women's contributions to the history of film colors. This research is done in context with our project Color in Motion, Chromatic Explorations of Cinema, which will result in an exhibition, catalog, and film programs opening at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures in Los Angeles in fall of 2024. Color in Motion has a multi-angled and generally wide approach. The exhibition explores color as a cinematic tool from the silent era to the digital age. It investigates filmmakers' creative and directed use of color, the science and technologies behind it, as well as the psychological, phenomenological, and commercial impact on audiences. Set in an experiential environment, the exhibition will be a dynamic presentation of objects in combination with media and interactive installations, deepening the understanding of the nature and historical use of color in film. Since the beginning of our research, we have been working closely with our advisory board, consisting of Barbara Flückinger, Joshua Yumibe, Kirsten Moana Thompson, and Ranjani Mazumdar, as well as our own SciTech Council, Lorna Roth and Genevieve Yu, in developing this project. These are the components I already mentioned. This is a preliminary floor plan for the exhibition, but I don't want to talk you through the entire exhibition today. I just really want to focus on two of our galleries. One is titled Technologies and Spectacle, which would be the second gallery in the exhibition walkthrough, and the other our monochrome media installation, the third gallery in the walkthrough. And I have picked these two because we would love to hear your feedback, expertise, and possibly even get some archival leads from you to further build out the content. First, let's take a look at Technologies and Spectacle. The key question this gallery asks: how can we understand color in film? How can we make this long and complex history accessible to visitors? In this gallery, we will introduce some of the key color technologies, from hand painting and stenciling to kinema and agfa and technicolor to digital. But we will also shine a light on the many contributions women have made on the development and production of historical film colors. As is often the case, and we've heard this many times at this symposium already, the female side of the film history was hardly or not at all been documented. For a while now, though, film historians, archivists, and experts in the field have been rediscovering this part of film history, and we are hoping that we can help make female achievements more visible through this exhibition. In particular, we are focusing on 4 case studies. Technicolor's famous Natalie Kalmus, the anonymous leader ladies who were so crucial for color calibration, the industrious and skillful women at Disney's Ink and Paint, and their predecessors from the silent era who worked as colorists for such companies as Pathé, we've already heard a little bit about that, or the studio of Elisabeth and Bert Toulier. Much has been written and said about Natalie Kalmus. Born in 1878, she was best known for her work as the color consultant and director of the Technicolor Art Department. She married Herbert Kalmus, a then student at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in 1902. While not an official co-founder of the Technicolor motion picture company with Herbert, Natalie Kalmus was a collaborator in the onset of the company's founding in 1915 and is often credited as a co-developer of the Technicolor process. From the beginning, she was deeply involved in the production of Technicolor films. Between 1934 and 1949, Kalmus received credit as color consultant on every film she worked on. Perhaps from her background as an art student, Kalmus held strong views on the purpose of color, its symbolism, and its impact on the human psyche. In 1932, Kalmus created a quick reference chart, The Significance of Color, for her department to use when consulting on films. This chart referenced the various emotions that are correlated to a certain color. Quote, blue, it represents peace, harmony, and home, and definitely refines and cools. Excellent for those working at high tension, quote end. This chart eventually developed into a full-length book, Color Consciousness, which was published in 1935, in which Kalmus elaborates further on the relationship between psychology and color. Kalmus's process was a deep collaboration with film production on 2 levels, as technical consultant but also on a creative level. Starting with a script, Kalmus and her team would research and plan appropriate color palettes that connected to the film's themes, location, emotion, and time period. From there, they would meet with the producers to set up a budget and schedule. Kalmus and team would then collaborate closely with the art and costume departments. Later, they would supervise the production of the film to ensure color continuity. Kalmus firmly believed that color was a key narrative tool that required attention to detail so that the colors of a film could complement the film's intent. This collaboration process, as you can imagine, was often not welcomed by studio heads and directors who resented Technicolor's deep creative involvement in their film productions and found Kalmus too strict with her interpretation of colors. Eventually, she was ousted from Technicolor in 1948 after filing a lawsuit claiming that she was entitled to half the assets of Technicolor after her divorce from Herbert. The court ruled against Natalie Kalmus, and she never worked on another film set again. She continued to speak and lecture about color and its impact on psychology before she died in 1965. While there are extensive materials from Kalmus and her husband discussing her overall career with Technicolor, the Natalie Kalmus papers are held at the Academy's Margaret Herrick Library. A key component that has yet to be found are the production notes she must have had. Color palettes for films, annotated scripts, or notes discussing certain colors for characters. The process of how she developed these palettes seems to be only documented through interviews of her former employees, but finding material that could corroborate this process would be vital. Undoubtedly, the perception of Kalmus's career was tainted by the men in the film industry who called her insufferable or used expletives. Finding material in her own words would be invaluable so that her impact on Hollywood cinema can be fully evaluated. While Kalmus was much discussed, the many faces of the so-called leader ladies remain unknown. The test images of women at the beginning of a film reel, you all know them, usually 3 to 6 frames, were cut into the countdown leader, were used to calibrate color, exposure, density, and skin tones, and were routinely used at the stages of film lab work, editing, and archiving. It is important to keep in mind that while the faces of the leader ladies were so familiar to the people working with films, they were never once seen by audiences. The practice started in the mid-1920s, was widespread in the 1930s, continued throughout most of the 20th century, but almost totally ceased today. By 1986, Kodak and many other companies started to switch over to LED, the laboratory aimed density cards, and since then, digital technologies have developed their own digital LED control systems. The impact of the leader ladies on decades of color calibration, however, remains enormous. As the film's colors were calibrated to the skin tone of the leader ladies, or China girls, as they were sometimes referred to, it is crucial to note that these women were typically white, which means that film stock was calibrated to white skin, impacting how darker skin tones were captured on film. Scholars such as Genevieve Yu have studied leader ladies to argue that this practice organizes film around the principles of whiteness and intertwines gender and sexuality, specifically images of women with film materiality. The laboratory aimed density China girl image is, after all, thought to be in more movies than any actress in the world. Historically, animation has always been part or even at the forefront of any major technological breakthrough. Color was no exception. Walt Disney had long been on the lookout for a convincing technology that would make his productions chromatic. He found it in the Technicolor process, which Disney started to implement after a demonstration by Herbert and Natalie Kalmus in 1932. The switch to color, of course, implied a great change in Disney's production process. The women already working as tracers and opacers on Disney's black and white animation cells now had to learn different and more complex methods of painting cells. Under the leadership of Disney's sister-in-law, Hazel Sewell, the new ink and paint department was established. This was the animation industry's first all-female division. Around 100 to later over 200 women worked here, divvied up into color modeling, inking, and finally painting and airbrushing. The complexity of their skill sets, responsibilities, and creative input has historically been undervalued. Kirsten Moana Thompson's and other scholarly research has shown that the women in color modeling in particular had a much bigger creative input into the final look of the films than assumed. They worked closely with all steps of planning and production to design the color palettes and assign colors to each character specifically. The inkers who traced the animators' lines onto the celluloid sheets often added their own interpretation, their personal hand to the drawing. The painters who applied the broad color palette of Disney's in-house produced paints, produced by men, of course, were also responsible for mixing and in many cases naming the new colors they came up with. These young women, usually no older than 25 and unmarried, were required to not only achieve uniformity amongst the animation cells, but to ensure that their brushstrokes captured the emotions of the scenes without leaving any streaks, bubbles, or fingerprints. Strictly separated from the other male-dominated departments at Disney, and we heard about that before, the women of ink and paint were often referred to as hens, or the nunnery, as they worked long shifts and faced demanding quotas to complete thousands of cells, often to the detriment of their physical and emotional health. However, their contributions to classic Disney animated films, such as Sleeping Beauty, Pinocchio, and Fantasia, were left uncredited. That, of course, is not new. These women stand in a long tradition of 19th century female magic lantern slide and postcard colorists. Like for the ink and painters at Disney, coloring was a chance for them to find work in a generally male-dominated industry. This association between color and women as the producers of color is interesting and multi-layered. The tedious and detailed yet laborious work was assumed to be better suited for young women whose eyesight was good and whose hands weren't trembling. The wages were lower than for their male counterparts, of course, but however, higher than for other jobs that were open to women at the time, such as nursing, teaching, housekeeping, etc. The women in the coloring departments of Pathé, for example, were, just like the women at Disney's Ink and Paint, often referred to as hens, mainly because they were able to save some of the money they were making to make a nest. Beyond those reasons, it was also widely popularly believed that color was something primitive that would appeal most to children and women. So young women were thought to be the most intuitive and sensitive to color choices. I'm going to skip a little bit over Pathé, but the images are different than the ones that Li Qian had, so I'm going to show them anyways. There are some of the examples. Let's go to a specific example. Mother and daughter duo Elisabeth and Berthe Tullier ran their own coloring company and hand-painted, amongst others, nearly every Méliès film from 1897 to 1912. According to Elisabeth, over 200 women colorists worked at her studio. Elisabeth, who came from a poor country family background, was trained in painting lantern slides, postcards, and photographs, and later used her skills to start her own business. Méliès, to whom color was a quintessential filmmaking tool, was a great admirer of Elisabeth's and Berthe's skills and publicly praised the work of, and publicly praised the work of the Tulliers, who continued to make a name for themselves. Even though the self-made Tulliers raised to some fame during their lifetimes, very little is known about them today. Joshua Yomiba's research has found that parallel phenomena were found in the US, some sources suggesting that the Edison Company hired the wife of Edmund Kuhn, we yet have to find her name, to hand-color serpentine dance films. Also, quote, Miss Martini in West Orange, New Jersey, Miss Sarah Levy of New York City, Miss Tompkins of Brooklyn, New York, quote end, all were said to lead coloring studios in the northeastern US. Before I wrap up, let's take a quick look at our next gallery, the monochrome media installation. Monochrome media installation surrounds visitors with a choreography of film clips on 4 screens in an otherwise dark gallery. Depicting monochrome film clips from the silent era to today, visitors will be exposed to the hallucinatory, otherworldly, sometimes eerie quality of monochrome film colors. With an emphasis on tinted and toned film clips, but also including later examples, this gallery aims to show that monochrome colors have lost nothing of their aesthetic appeal. Special attention will be paid to select film clips which make the presentation as color authentic as possible. Barbara Fluckinger and the research she has conducted for her timeline of historical film colors is helping us tremendously in our efforts. However, I would really like to take this opportunity to help us find suitable clips for this purpose. In particular, we are looking for restorations of films in their original authentic colors. I know that's a complex question, but I'm happy to follow your lead. Archival holdings related to the innovations of women in this field, and international examples which are especially desirable to us as we are trying to widen our scope to global cinema. Your feedback and your help would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to this truly inspiring symposium. I'm thrilled to be here. When tracing women's work in film history, questions such as how film history generally have been written, who is mentioned, who is left out, and why come to the fore. Today I wish to address one way to challenge the dominant methodologies and concepts in traditional male-oriented historiography by presenting the Nordic Women in Film website. Nordic Women in Film is a digital publication and resource for research on women working in the Nordic film industry. It's a database of name entries or professional profiles with articles and interviews with and about women in the Nordic film industry, both from a historic and a present-day perspective. The website's aim is to increase and disseminate knowledge and awareness of women's professional contributions to film in the Nordic region, and to put the spotlight on neglected or forgotten work. Thus, one endeavor of the website is to make women's work in film history and beyond more visible. The website was initiated by the Swedish Film Institute and is run in collaboration with the National Library of Norway and with Copenhagen University in Denmark and Stockholm University in Sweden. Hence, it's a collaboration between two national film heritage institutions and two universities, providing opportunities for inter-Nordic and inter-institutional exchange of competence regarding film historiography, film policy, working conditions, and archival practices. The Nordic Women in Film website is a platform where past meets present. The time frame of the site spans from the early 1900s until today. This also means that the collectively written information on the site is quite diverse, with in-depth articles written by film scholars, as well as contemporary interviews with women working in the industry today, written by film journalists or writers with an interest in film and gender issues. This also means that the website has a quite broad readership within the Nordic countries, of course, spanning from film scholars to film industry professionals, as well as to a general audience with an interest in film. Knowing that it has not always been easy to find information about the pioneering women working in film in the early years of cinema, one endeavor of the database is to also gather information about women working in the film industry today, and to make that information accessible and visible. To a certain degree, the website also has a networking function for active female film workers. Through a form on the website, it's possible to come into contact with a number of female film workers, which hopefully serves as a practical tool for the active film industry, for example, when it comes to employing new crew members. The Nordic Women in Film website focuses on film workers behind the camera, exploring women's scope for action in a variety of professional roles, such as, for example, gaffers, animators, continuity supervisors, intimacy coordinators, cinematographers, casting directors, and so on. The website also features professional profiles of women that, although not working directly in film production, nonetheless have taken part in shaping discourses on cinema and film culture, such as early film critics and film censors. However, there are no actors on the site unless they also work in some other capacity behind the camera. This is because we wanted to shift focus from women's work in front of the camera, which is arguably the only type of film work where women's contributions have not been neglected in film history, and to highlight instead women's work behind the camera. The website was launched in April 2016, and it started as a Swedish project. The initiative to create the site came from the documentary filmmaker Tove Torbjörnsson, who at the time of her tragically early death in 2015 worked as a head of department at the Swedish Film Institute. Her original inspiration came from the project Nordic Women's Literature, focusing on women authors, and the idea was to do something similar for film. The idea was first launched in 2012 at Almedalen, a Swedish event for political discussions and lobbying, together with the first gender equality plan from Anna Särner, former CEO of the Swedish Film Institute. In 2013, journalist Jannike Åhlund was recruited to manage the work of collecting information about women film workers in Sweden from existing materials at the Swedish Film Institute, in particular from the Swedish Film Database and the printed series Swedish Filmography, Svensk Filmografi, but also pieces of information scattered across published works and unpublished archival materials. 2013 also saw the launch of the fantastic Women Film Pioneers project, which of course today is a well-known resource for cinema scholars doing research on female filmmakers who worked in the silent era. Although diverse in geographical scope as well as by time frame, the Women Film Pioneers project and Nordic Women in Film also share similarities, and it has of course been a great inspiration for the Nordic Women in Film website. When Jannike Åhlund moved on to other projects in 2019, I was recruited to continue her work as editor and manager of the project, and in particular to work with the Swedish part of the site, which is why many of my examples here today will be Swedish. The website is, however, collective work with numerous people involved in researching and writing biographies, in-depth articles and interviews about and with the women on the site, with the endeavor of making archival and biographical information accessible for a broader audience, as well as making contemporary women film workers more visible through interview-based articles. Women who owned or ran cinemas, women musicians who played in early cinemas, female costume designers, women who were producers or ran production companies, and even to a certain degree canonized women filmmakers such as Maja Zetterling have, from a historical perspective, had their unfair share of oblivion and neglect, and we wanted to take part in an effort to change that. Reconstructing the biographies of the pioneering women have in many cases not been easy. Information is often scattered across a range of sources, including newspapers, film magazines, advertisements, film programs, etc. Unconventional sources such as popular women's magazines from the time can also be rich in information concerning early film culture. Material concerning Swedish film and film culture can also be researched at the Swedish Film Institute's non-film collections, containing stills and posters, manuscripts, personal and company archives, objects and costumes. And similar collections can of course also be found in our collaborative countries at the National Library of Norway and at the Danish Film Institute. Focusing on the Swedish context, I want to give you a couple of examples of personal and company archives with quite diverse contents, which have been researched for articles and biographies on the Nordic Women in Film website. Notably, only 14 out of 120 of the personal archives are connected to female film workers, which is quite symptomatic when discussing women's agency or absence in film history at large. Most of the personal archives, male or female, are connected to directors or actors, professions that historically as well as today are associated with agency and power, making these professions more likely to be documented and leaving traces in the archive. Today there is, however, an awareness of this with proactive choices to approach and collect female archives. Likewise, the focus when collecting new archives is not solely on directors, but also considers other roles in film production. And this is why an archive such as that of title and credit designer Alva Lundin is so special. Between the years 1919 and 1960, Lundin created title sequences for nearly 500 feature films, among them Marit Stiller's Eroticon from 1920. Alva Lundin's archive consists of title cards only. With no personal, financial, or other documents, it's an archive for the study of Lundin's aesthetical process. Film scholar Sofia Bull has studied the title cards in the archive, and in combination with conducting interviews with living relatives of Lundin, with material found at the Technical School for Female Apprentices, where she was educated, as well as finding biographical information in articles and interviews in various newspapers and magazines from the time period when Lundin was active, Sofia Bull has mapped out the professional life of Alva Lundin as well as analyzed the methods and progress in her aesthetical choices. And her research results are articulated in this article in Nordic Women in Film. Another archive which is highly interesting for the study of women's work in the Swedish film industry is the archive to the Swedish Women's Film Association, an association established in 1976 concerned with women's rights and within the Swedish film industry. The organization also raised questions about women's agency or lack of at film festivals and other public or political arenas where film was discussed, as well as how women were represented on screen. The archive, which is rich in information, contains minutes from meetings, correspondence, programs, reports, and other documents for research on the history of the company. Several articles on the Nordic Women in Film website are connected to the Swedish Women's Film Association and that archive. Director Maj Zetterling's archive is large and diverse, containing several versions of manuscripts, manuscripts to unfinished works, stills, correspondences, her own research, notes and drawings, etc., making it possible to follow her work process closely. And there are several articles on the Nordic Women in Film website connected to the work conducted by researchers and filmmakers in that archive. As stated previously, Nordic Women in Film began as a Swedish project, but in 2017 it was further developed through the Women's Film History Network, a cooperation between the Swedish Film Institute, the National Library of Norway, and the film sections at the University of Copenhagen and Stockholm University. And through this cooperation, the site grew to contain material on women working in all of the Scandinavian film industries. Currently, the Nordic Women in Film partners in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden are hosting a series of workshops taking place in Copenhagen, Stockholm, and Oslo, with the joint mission to explore feminist film history in Scandinavia. A diverse group of scholars, archivists, and film industry professionals were invited to consider contemporary and historical working conditions for women, as well as highlighting women's work into specific professions, screenwriting and costume design. One of the outcomes of the workshop series will be new in-depth articles and biographies published on the Nordic Women in Film website, hopefully providing access to research for a broader audience. As of today, the site features 1,500 name entries and 270 articles about female film workers from mainly Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. There are very few film workers from the other two Nordic countries, Finland and Iceland, on the website. But the hope and ambition is, of course, to find collaborators in these countries as well, to make the website truly Nordic, as the name states, instead of mainly Scandinavian, which is how it is at present. When you type in nordicwomeninfilm.com in your browser, this is what you'll see. The most recent articles are up front, followed by highlighted name entries and articles. At the moment, most texts are written in Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish, with a limited number translated into English. There is, however, a slow but still ongoing process of making more texts available for an international reader by way of translation and by taking in more biographies and articles written in English. So among the featured articles on the website right now, one is in the form of a podcast where contemporary screenwriters Silla Jackert and Lisa Langset, in conversation with film professor Titti Soila, discuss different aspects of screenwriting. Another one highlights avant-garde filmmaker Gunvor Nelson, who recently donated archival material to the Swedish Film Institute. As you can see in the right column, we connect the articles to the professional profiles of the person or people who are featured in the article, as well as to previous articles or interviews with said person under the heading Read More. Film scholar Shelley Stamp encourages us to trace the shapes defined by women's absence, by rethinking authorship and shift focus to female film workers in diverse professions who all in different ways have taken part in shaping film cultures around the world. Our hope is that the Nordic Women in Film website can contribute to a more inclusive and diverse notion of cinematic authorship and provide opportunities to trace women's contributions to film history and beyond. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.